Hello and welcome to my latest video, which is my top 10 loading screens. Before I get into the top 10, there's a few things I'd like to say. First of all, I'm sorry that it's taken so long for me to publish another video. I've been spending most of my spare time writing a game for the Spectrum, and it's a kind of Lords of Midnight inspired RPG. Borrowing some RPG tropes from Bard's Tale, to be honest with you. Think Lords of Midnight crossed with Bard's Tale. And that's been taking a lot of my time. Next, I'd like to thank everyone who subscribed. I'm up to 1,000 subscribers now, so that's quite a landmark. I never actually thought when I started this I'd get to that many subscribers. For my latest subscribers, thank you very much for pushing the total over, and you were probably wondering when on earth you'd ever see a notification of a new video. Well, here it is. So a bit of background about how I did this. When I was thinking about this, I was thinking I'm surprised no one's done this before. In fact, I searched it on YouTube and couldn't find anyone who'd done it before. I just think it's such a good thing to do. There were so many great loading screens for the Spectrum, and you used to get them on loads and loads of games, and there's some terrific artwork in them, and I just thought it was worth doing and celebrating some of those. The way I came up with my top 10 was to go through my top 100 Spectrum games and assign every single one of the screenshots on those games a value between 0 and 9, 9 being the highest. Then the 10 that were the top, so the 10 that were ranked 9, I then further ranked those to get my top 10. So I ranked those between 1 and 10. And that gave me the 10 loading screens that I'm going to go through now. So if there are loading screens that you think should be in this list that aren't, it could just be because they weren't in my top 100. As always, I'd love to hear other people's top 10s. If there's screenshots you really like and artwork you really like, then let me know. I was thinking of showing the screens loading, but I thought, well, as I'm celebrating the artwork, I think I'll just use screenshots so that you can see the full screen. So let's get on with the top 10. My number 10 loading screen is Jetpack. The thing that really strikes you about this loading screen is Jetman in the middle. The detail on him is absolutely terrific. He looks like a kind of NASA astronaut from the Apollo days with his big space suit, and he's got his laser, and the laser blasts are going right across the screen in all of those different colours. Quite nicely done as well. There's not a huge amount of colour clash on this screen. There's a little bit around the fire coming out of his jetpack and a little bit around the colours, but not too much. You don't notice it too much. There's also, of course, the Ultimate logo itself, and I really like the Ultimate logo. It's really well done. I like the way that they used black pixels to kind of give the reflection. Normally for a reflection, what you would do is that you'd use white pixels. I think I've seen a lot of reflections done with white, but the black just really adds something to it. It makes it look really good, gives it that little bit of extra. It does take up a lot of the screen though, as do the words Jetpack themselves. I think because the kind of main part of the loading screen takes up only that kind of middle portion of the screen, that I didn't put this higher in the list. The use of colour is good as well. The magenta mountains in the background look really good, and once again there's a ton of detail on them. I'll probably say this a few times during this video, but I can imagine people doing these screenshots and kind of getting a rough idea of what they want and then spending a lot of time tweaking individual pixels just to get the look right. Those mountains look really good and look like a real kind of set of mountains on an alien landscape. Ultimate were obviously very concerned with copyright infringement. Still are, really, if you think about it. They won't let people download their games for free. They still protect them. But there's 2 copyright symbols on this screen. I like the use of the flash attribute as well for the jetpack is loading, so that you know that your game is loading. And the last thing to comment on are the stars in the background, which I think if I was doing this, and I'm no real artist, so I'm not one to speak, I'd have just done single pixels in the background kind of randomly. I really like the way they've put some variation into the stars. Some are bigger than others, one's really bright, there's kind of a little tiny moon in the background as well. Let's face it, when you look up at the stars at night, they're not just absolutely uniform, they do look differently, and this is reminiscent of that. Really well done. So that's my number 10 loading screen, Jetpack. My number 9 loading screen is Jack. This is a great loading screen. Just look at that lovely big smiley face right in the middle of the screen and those two huge fists. This is a game you're going to enjoy, and while you're loading it, the loading screen is telling you that. Then the Bombjack logo itself is taken straight from the arcade machine. I loved the Bombjack arcade machine, I loved the artwork on it, and the artwork on this is reminiscent of that too. I love the sparkling bombs, the fact that they've got those on the loading screen is great. Then there's your main enemy, which is that bird thing in the top right hand corner. That's really, really well done as well. Looks really, really good. I love the use of dark blue on cyan in that. I think that enemy has a proper name, but I don't know what it is. If anyone knows, can you put it in the comments? The Elite logo looks good as well. It uses black pixels as kind of reflection on the Elite logo. I'd never noticed that before commenting about it on the Ultimate logo. Detail in the background is good. I don't think it's quite as good as the detail on the Jetpack loading screen, but it's pretty good, and you can see the pyramid and the Sphinx, which forms the background of the first screen. This one has a signature too. It was done by Kaz. I don't know who Kaz is, but well done. It was a really, really good job. But the thing that I really like about this, that I said it first and I'll go back to now, is the big smiley face. That really makes this loading screen for me. As I said, this is a game you're going to enjoy and the loading screen just tells you that. So that's my number 9 loading screen, Bombjack. My number 8 loading screen is Daley Thompson's Decathlon. For me, the thing that most impresses about this loading screen is the feeling of speed that you get from it. It actually looks like Daley is running towards you into the screen. And that must have been really, really difficult to do. The other thing as well is it's a really good rendition of Daley Thompson. His face looks like Daley Thompson's face, or as near as you could get to it with pixels of that resolution. But the proportions are right as well. When you look at this, you don't think, oh, that's Daley Thompson with a big head, or his arms look wrong, or his legs look wrong, or anything. It just looks right. It looks like Daley Thompson. It looks like his figure. The use of the bright attribute in this loading screen seems to have been a bit of a double-edged sword. So it was used for Daley Thompson's Decathlon, the logo, and it was used on his running shirt. And it's a bit weird because there's kind of colour clash with it in places you wouldn't expect, on Daley's eye and on his elbow and shoulders and things like that, and on his forearm, which you think, well, surely they could have got around that. That doesn't look like colour clash. That almost looks like laziness, and it wasn't quite finished off at the end. Which is a pity, really. I'm willing to give some leeway with that, with the colour clash on various things. So with the cyan background in the middle, it's on Daley's wrist a bit, and that's okay, I don't mind that, but those bright attributes around his arms just seem wrong to me, as if they could have been dealt with but weren't. That's being really picky though. The background's good as well. The crowd looks really good. I bet it's hard to do a crowd as very, very small heads in the background when you're doing something like this. But it's well done. They kind of start large in the foreground, the closer they are to the viewer, and kind of slowly all merge together, which looks pretty good. The Olympic rings look good too. It's been really difficult to get them right with so little colour clash, and there isn't really a lot of colour clash on those rings. I also like the athletes in the background. You don't see much of them, but it's like they're giving up. It's kind of, oh no, Daley's so much faster than us, we're just going to kind of give up and slow down and pull up. There's no particular signature on this one, but it wouldn't surprise me if it was hidden somewhere in that crowd. Lastly, I think I'd mention the Ocean logo. It's not particularly remarkable on this, but I like the way that they've done it kind of on the billboard at the side of the track. So that's my number 8 loading screen, Daley Thompson's Decathlon. My number 7 loading screen is Laser Squad. Now, the first thing that strikes you about this loading screen is that huge big character right in the middle. I don't think they could have made him any bigger. Going back to what I said about Daley Thompson's Decathlon, I don't think they couldn't got his proportions right, that's for certain. And that's why I like this loading screen so much. The characters really dominate the loading screen. Admittedly, they are pretty much monochrome, but it's done in such a good way, and there is so much detail. And let's face it, using monochrome to get around the Spectrum's colour clash problems was done by lots of people in lots of games, so for a loading screen it's quite acceptable. I like the background as well. That huge moon or sun in the background looks terrific, and the kind of ruins, this is obviously a place of war where things have been destroyed. And the characters look like a squad of soldiers. They're facing in different directions to give them cover, they've got their weapons primed. They look like they're ready for action, which was what you want in a Laser Squad game. There's not much to say. There is a bit of use of colour. I love the way they've avoided colour clash on the main character's head as well. He goes right up to the top and is just squeezed between yellow blocks for the Laser Squad logo and the original game concept by Target Games. And then I presume that's Target's logo with the red as well. That's done quite well as well. One little red square in the middle of everything else in exactly the right position to avoid colour clash. I think the Blade logo itself stands out a bit. The magenta doesn't quite seem in keeping with anything else, but I'll forgive them that because this is such a good loading screen. And on the right hand side, I think that's a signature. It looks like a signature, so I can't quite make it out. A potenti. If that's pronounced right, I'll be very surprised, but if you were the person who did this loading screen, very, very good job. This is really, really good. I like this loading screen a lot, which is why it's in number 7. So that's my number 7 loading screen, Laser Squad. My number 6 loading screen is The Lord of the Rings. And this is another loading screen where you've got a huge character dominating the main part of the loading screen. In this case, it's one of the Black Riders, and doesn't he look menacing? There's just so much packed into this loading screen, and the use of colour is excellently done. When you look at it, how many colours are close together, around, I think that's Gollum's head or a goblin's head on the left, the green, is so close to the yellow and red. Getting those colour attributes just right must have been really difficult. There is a little bit of colour clash on this. The bright usage on the right hand side, which I'm guessing is the Shire. Some of the trees are done in dark, and you can tell it's colour blocks, and you can tell they kind of bleed into what should be the greener fields beside them, but I'll definitely forgive them that. And the red on the horse's bridle kind of clashes a bit. There's a bit in his eyes, but then you can almost think, well, shouldn't that horse have had red eyes? The Lord of the Rings logo does dominate a lot of the screen, but there's so much packed in there that you can forgive it that. And I love the font that the Lord of the Rings is written in. It's very, very good and kind of in keeping with the book and that kind of fantasy theme anyway. Then there's the scroll effects of the main title itself, the way they wind themselves around the loading screen. I really, really like. I think that's very, very well done. This must have taken a long time to get right. I'm guessing it's by Melbourne House, so they'll have used Melbourne Draw for this, which I think a lot of loading screens were done in, and this is using it to particularly good effect. And at the bottom of the screen, you've got the Black Riders being swamped by the river that happens halfway through the first book of The Lord of the Rings. The only thing probably missing from this is a hobbit. I don't think there are any hobbits, unless those characters on the left are hobbits, but they look a bit kind of mean and menacing to me, so I always think of them as goblins or Gollum or something like that, but maybe they are hobbits. So that's my number 6 loading screen, The Lord of the Rings. My number 5 loading screen is Back to School. This is kind of a double number 5 actually. I had both Back to School and School Days in the top 10, and I kind of had to choose between one of them, and I ended up going for Back to School. I thought it was a bit unfair to take 2 spaces with the game and its follow-up. So think of this as Back to School and School Days, but out of the two of them, I think I like Back to School more. And the reason for that is it just reminds me of being at school and being a teenager and glancing at girls and girls glancing back at you and rushing out the house, probably at the last possible moment to get to school on time with your mum handing your bag to you. And that's pretty much for me what's going on in this screenshot. The back to school title is of course across the top of the loading screen. It looks really good. School spelt incorrectly again, as per the kind of in-joke of both the games, and there's not much colour to it. There's not a lot of colour to it, so it avoids colour clash. But where the colour is used, there's a little bit. There's a little bit around. I presume that's Eric and his legs, and the red on the satchel isn't quite right, is it? But I'll forgive it that. I'm forgiving a lot of colour clash in a lot of these. Again, the artist's done a really good job of the proportion of the figures as well. I think the reason I go on about that is I'm a bit of a rubbish artist, and if I ever try and draw a person, getting the proportions right is one of the things I get wrong. I know the head's supposed to go into the body 6 times or something like that, but that doesn't seem to help me. Unlike, say, the Laser Squad or the Jetpack loading screen, there isn't a lot of detail on this, but what detail there is, it's kind of sparingly used, but really, really well used. Just picking one little thing, those few pixels down the left-hand side of the blazer just give you the impression that, yeah, there's some texture there without being over the top. I really like that. Sometimes less is more, and I think in this loading screen, less is definitely being used to convey more in a very good way. I don't think I can say much more about it than that. It's just really pleasing and I really like it. And as I say, it brings back good memories for me, which is probably why it's so high. So that's my number 5 loading screen, Back to School. My number 4 loading screen is Pajama Armour. I love this loading screen, it's brilliant. The character of Wally Week in the middle, looking forlorn and thinking, oh no, what am I going to do? I've woken up inside one of my dreams and I've got to try and wake myself up for work, is brilliant. In the game, that is quite a daunting task, and for me, that's what's on Wally's face. The other thing that really stands out for me in this loading screen is Wally's bunny slippers. I love those bunny slippers. I remember when I first saw it, looking at it and thinking, they're bunny slippers. He's got bunny slippers on. That's just such a nice little subtle touch. You don't see that in the game, of course. You can't, I think. These sprite is big, but it's not big enough to convey bunny slippers, but it's excellent. When I reviewed Pajama Armour for my top 100 games, I said that the attitude it took to Colour Clash was just ignoring it. Pajama Armour was one of those games that went, let's not worry about Colour Clash, let's just let the colours clash. You can still play it, it's still a brilliant game, that doesn't really matter. And yeah, on this loading screen, there is a bit, I'm going to forgive it. I'm not going to go through every little bit where there is some, but I'm forgiving colour clash, of course, on loading screens. It must be really, really difficult to do a good loading screen with a loss of colour without getting any clash. But I think with Pajama Armour, the message is the same as the song title. Don't worry, be happy, just enjoy things and don't worry if the colours clash. And that's what's happening on this loading screen and in the game. I like the Pajama Armour title, it stands out nicely. I like the use of different colours, and the Microgen title stands out nicely and isn't out of place. It looks good, that bright cyan really makes it stand out. I also like the subtle hint of things that will happen in the game. So Wally's obviously a bit smaller than he would be in real life as he is in the game. There's the stars saying, yeah, there's a rocket, you're going to have to take a trip up to the moon on this game. There's the boxing glove popping out of the door, which happens in the game as well. I like loading screens that give you a little bit of the flavour of the game, and I think this really, really does, but it's just such a pleasing image. That's my number 4 loading screen, Pajama Armour. My number 3 loading screen is Wanted Monty Mole. The first thing that strikes you about this is the magenta. There's tons of magenta in this, but the whole thing is really, really colourful. Also, it's really bright. I'd guess that every single character square in the whole screen has the bright attribute set. Now, in general, I was never a fan of magenta as a colour on the spectrum. It was always a bit gaudy, but it's used really, really well here, and it goes well with all the other colours. The cyan of the Spade and Monty's shirt, the yellow of his hat, the red of his trousers. It just looks really, really good. And there's very, very little colour clash on this screen. A little bit around the shovel handles, pretty much all I can see, to be honest with you. There's maybe a little bit more, but not a lot. Monty on the left there is, of course, the main character. He has that blinking eye, which looks good as well, really good. Another good use of the flash attribute there. Very, very good use of the flash attribute. Possibly the best on any screenshot I've ever seen. It makes him look like he's winking or blinking. My guess is he's winking to camera, but to be honest with you, I don't really know. The titles are good as well. The Gremlin graphics logo looks good, and the Monty title isn't the full title of the game, but looks good as well. Kind of looks to me like it's been written in shaving foam, if I'm honest. The Gremlin in the bottom right looks really, really good. Wasn't part of the game, so maybe shouldn't have as much screen space, but who cares? Then finally, there's the Arthur Scargill caricature with his head sticking out of the hole in the ground. That courted a little bit of controversy with this game, which was, of course, released during the miners' strike. Helped the game get a little bit of media attention, and I suppose the saying that no publicity is bad publicity really helped this game. I.e., it was on the telly, and not many games made it to the news, so it can't have harmed it. Now, Peter Harrop's name is at the bottom of the screen. He was the author of the game itself. I presume he also did the screen as well. So assuming that's true, well done, Peter. This is an excellent screen. My number 3. Yep, that's my number 3 screenshot. Wanted Monty more. My number 2 loading screen is Rex. Now, in the same way that the previous screenshot used magenta as a really, really good background, Rex uses black to a very, very similar effect. And looking at the screenshot, it's a very clever thing to do, because if your background's black and you use that as kind of part of your figure as well, which has been done here, then you get no attribute clash between your background and your main figure, which is what's happening here. So it's really, really good. Helps keep down the color clash on this screen. The other thing that I think's done well with this is there's obviously a kind of lighting source, a bright yellow lighting source to the left, which means that any kind of colour clash you see, you can kind of forgive and think, well, that's just too with the shading. I also think there's some use of the bright attribute here, but not all over, and it's done really, really well. It actually makes it look like certain bits are brighter than others, and quite often in other screenshots we've seen that using the bright attribute is a double-edged sword when you've got a big area of colour like you have here. I guess some of that comes down to using the black background. I've talked about the detail on figures in some of these loading screens, and the detail on Rex is absolutely superb. I think he looks excellent. His head looks really, really good. I love the red eyes. He looks a bit meaner than he's kind of described in a game. This is a Rhino Sapien eco-warrior trying to save his planet. You'd think he would be a bit less evil looking with his red eyes and a bit more heroic looking, but who cares? He looks really, really good. He has that huge big weapon there. I don't know if that's trying to compensate for something. I'm certainly not going to speculate. And the rest of the character, the hands look good. They've got the cartoon 3 fingers, which makes the proportion of the hands look better. There's ammo belts all over the place. This is just a really, really good screenshot with tons of detail in that character. I think this would have been my number 1 if there was a bit more detail in the background. It's just got the writing there. Doesn't actually have the name of the game itself, really. It just says ID Rex. A bit about him, but it really sets the tone for the game as well when you start. Then the Martech symbol is just a copyright symbol and the name written in a quite basic font, so not much to say about that. That's my number 2 loading screen, Rex. And my number 1 loading screen is Rambo. When the film Rambo came out, Sylvester Stallone really was a huge star. The Rocky films had been tremendously popular. First Blood hadn't been that big a film, it was more of a cult classic than a huge blockbuster. But there was a kind of tide of 80s action films that Rambo just caught perfectly and made Sylvester Stallone the biggest star, I think, in the world at that time. And the game was treated with huge anticipation. And this loading screen was the first thing you saw of the game, and you looked at it and thought, wow, that's good. One of the difficulties of portraying humans on the spectrum is you just don't have the colour for the skin tones. This loading screen gets over that by just having the main figure of Rambo bathed in light from a huge explosion of red and yellow light. And that main character looks like Sylvester Stallone. It is the image of him. More so than the Daley Thompson Decathlon loading screen had the image of Daley Thompson. This just is almost a perfect rendition of Sylvester Stallone. But what really gets it for me is the background on this. There isn't a lot of detail in the background, but it's very reminiscent of a scene from the film. There's an explosion in the background and there's all that fire. And it's making best use of the very few available colours that you had on the Spectrum. Those bright, vibrant yellows and reds really fit perfectly with the film, with the explosion, with the loading screen. It all says, this is an action game. You're going to load this game up and there are going to be big explosions and you're going to enjoy it. Slightly ironically, I don't think Rambo's the best game for the Spectrum ever. It's not bad, I enjoy it. I've reviewed it in my top 100 games and it got quite high. But I don't think it could live up to the expectation of the loading screen. Strangely enough, even though I'm saying the main character is very recognisable, the artist still felt the need to put Stallone across the bottom of the screen just so you know who it is, or probably, much more likely, to cash in on the popularity of Sylvester Stallone at that point in time. The title's well done, the Rambo words stand out, don't overpower anything, even though they're quite large within the loading screen itself. And then, of course, there's the subtitle First Blood Part 2 just snuck in below it. The Ocean logo looks good as well. It stands out really, really well against everything else, the blue and the white and the cyan. There's a signature on this, David Thorpe, who I know was one of the authors, along with David Anderson, according to World of Spectrum. So I'm assuming he did the loading screen, and very well done to him. This is excellent. I really like this loading screen. It's by far one of my favourites. Or by far my most favourite. So that's my number one loading screen, Rambo. So I have a few honourable mentions. First is Bugaboo the Flea, which doesn't particularly have a good loading screen, but it kind of has a good intro sequence. So as it loads, you get information about the planet you're approaching, and then after it loads, it kind of zooms in on it, and you see a little intro of the little flea getting trapped down the hole. Next, the pyramid, which has a really good just line effect, and this is a really good way that you can kind of do a loading screen without actually using the screen string. Doomsday Castle, the follow-up, had one as well, but it wasn't as good as this. I really like this one. Another simple but effective loading screen is, of course, Manic Miner. I love the way it does that. It's absolutely brilliant, using the flash attribute to be able to show two words in kind of the same space. I guess it was the first animated loading screen as well. Then there's Chaos. I really like this loading screen. This was kind of number 11. I put this in. I actually started thinking of honourable mentions because it was really hard for me to leave this one out. And lastly, there's the Wild Bunch. I like the effect. I love the silhouette of the vulture on the cactus. I think it looks absolutely excellent. I've had honourable mentions, so I suppose I should have some dishonourable mentions as well. First, and probably the most disappointing loading screen I've ever seen, has to be Jet Set Willy. I mean, come on, guys, try. I suppose the argument with Jet Set Willy is the game was so great it didn't need a good loading screen. Next, there's Spectral Panic for exactly the same reason. It looks pretty similar, actually. Then there's Ghostbusters. I mean, you could have done such a good loading screen for Ghostbusters. Why, oh why did they do this? Okay, so you get some text to read while the game loads. I guess it would keep you interested the first time you load it, but oh, come on. My last dishonourable mention is The Hobbit. Because, well, I don't know, it's just not very good. The dragon doesn't look like a dragon to me. It looks kind of like a dog. Admittedly, a kind of yellow smoke-breathing dog with a big red fork tongue, but yeah, that's not a dragon. However, The Hobbit isn't the worst, but mentioning that as a dishonourable mention does let me mention this as the final honourable mention, which is a redrawing of the Hobbit loading screen. Someone called Mick Farrow posted on the World of Spectrum forums a couple of years ago, I think it was, and this is excellent. Now that's what the Hobbit loading screen should have looked like. In fact, that's so good, I'm going to leave you now with this loading screen and a little bit of music.